The body was already cold by the time Jeon Hak-yeon arrived at the morgue. He stood at the threshold of the identification room for exactly 4 seconds before stepping inside. No one had ever seen him hesitate. His lieutenant, Choi Dae-won, noted those 4 seconds and filed them somewhere private and permanent. The sheet was white. The room smelled like antiseptic and something colder underneath it. A city official stood to the side holding a clipboard, visibly uncomfortable in the presence of a man whose name made magistrates rearrange their schedules. Jeon Hak-yeon pulled the sheet back himself. He looked at the face beneath it for a long time. Then he covered it again, turned to the official, and said 3 words in a voice that carried no emotion whatsoever. That is not her. The official blinked. He had the dental records. He had the fingerprint confirmation. He had 2 witnesses and a coroner's report that had been filed before midnight. He had everything except the courage to say so to this particular man. Sir, the identification is... Find her. He said it the way other men say good morning. Flat. Certain. Already moving on to the logistics. Her name was Serena Cole. She had walked into the Jeon Group's downtown office 14 weeks earlier carrying a laptop bag, and an expression that suggested she found most things mildly disappointing. She was a forensic accountant. She had been sent to audit 3 subsidiaries and file a compliance report. She was supposed to be invisible. She was the least invisible person Jeon Hak-yeon had ever been in a room with. She had found the discrepancy on day 9. A routing anomaly in a shell account buried beneath 4 layers of legitimate transaction data. Something that should not have existed. Something that, if followed to its source, would unravel 11 years of a very specific kind of betrayal. She had not reported it. Instead she had memorized it, closed the file, returned her visitor's badge and walked out of the building. 3 days later she was dead. Or so the paperwork said. Jeon Hak-yeon did not believe paperwork. He believed what he could see with his own eyes. And what his eyes told him, standing in that morgue with the sheet replaced and the official still gripping his clipboard with white-knuckled hands, was this. Serena Cole was not dead. She was hiding. And the only question that mattered now was whether she was hiding from him, or hiding for him. He walked out of the morgue, got into the back of his car, and did something that Choi Dae-won had not seen him do in 11 years of service. He picked up his phone and called someone without being prompted. The line rang 4 times. Then I went to voicemail. Serena. A pause. I know. He ended the call and looked out the window at the city moving past in the dark. What happened next would shake the foundations of everything the Jeon Syndicate had built. And it began with a woman who had chosen death over the truth she was not yet ready to tell. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel and this story already has you locked in, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Because this story is about going places you are absolutely not ready for. Stay with me. Chapter 1: The Audit. Serena Cole had a rule about powerful men. She did not look at them directly. Not because she was afraid of them. She had grown up watching her mother negotiate with landlords, school boards, and one particularly stubborn county commissioner without raising her voice once. Fear was not the issue. The issue was that powerful men, in her experience, interpreted being looked at as an invitation. And Serena did not issue invitations she did not intend to honor. She had broken that rule on day 3. She had been sitting at the temporary workstation they had set up for her on the 14th floor, running a comparison audit on 2 sets of transaction logs that were supposed to mirror each other and did not, when the elevator opened and Jeon Hak-yeon walked onto the floor. He was not supposed to be there. His assistant had confirmed his schedule. So until Thursday. She had factored his absence into her working rhythm. He crossed the floor without stopping, spoke briefly to 2 people, and was heading back to the elevator when he paused. He turned and looked directly at her. Not at the general area of her workstation. At her. With the specific attention of a man who had noticed something that did not fit the pattern he was expecting. She held eye contact for exactly 2 seconds before returning to her screen. Those 2 seconds were a miscalculation. He changed direction. I walked to her workstation, pulled a chair from the adjacent empty desk without asking, turned it around, and sat with his arms resting on the back of it, looking at her the way you look at a crossword clue you cannot immediately solve. You are the auditor. I am. Which subsidiaries? Jeon Logistics. Hana Commercial Property. The Seongsu Holding Vehicle. How long? 3 more weeks if the documentation comes through on time. Longer if it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. She kept her eyes on her screen. The transaction logs were still open. The anomaly she had found 6 hours earlier was 2 windows behind her active tab. She did not close it. Closing it would have been a tell. You found something, he said. It was not a question. She looked at him then. The full 2 seconds again, this time deliberate. I find things every day, she said. That is what I am contracted to do. He studied her face with an attention that was almost clinical. Then he nodded once, stood up, replaced the chair, and walked back to the elevator. That evening she stayed until the floor was empty and spent 4 hours tracing the anomaly to its next layer. What she found there made her sit very still for a long time with her hands flat on the desk and her breathing deliberately slow. It was not an accounting error. It was a pipeline. I am 11 years old. Routed through the Seongsu Holding Vehicle in a way that would only be visible to someone looking for something else entirely. Someone like her. Someone who had been sent, she now understood, by people who did not realize what they were actually pointing her at. She photographed everything on her personal phone. Then she closed every window, shut down her workstation, and sat in the dark of the empty office for 17 minutes deciding what to do next. She had 3 options. Report it through official channels, which would expose her as the source before she could protect herself. Take it directly to Jeon Hak-yeon, which required trusting a man she had known for 3 days. Or say nothing and get out. She chose the third option. She chose wrong. But she would not know that for another 9 days. What she discovered on day 9 would make her wish she had chosen differently from the very beginning. Chapter 2, The Thing She Saw. Day 9 arrived on a Wednesday. Serena had developed a rhythm by then. She arrived at the building at 7:45, before most of the administrative staff. She left between 8 and 9 in the evening. She ate lunch at her desk. She spoke when spoken to and offered nothing that was not directly requested. She was, by every observable measure, completely unremarkable. This was intentional. She had also, by day 9, mapped the full structure of the pipeline. It moved money in one direction and information in another. The money went to an external account she could trace to a holding company registered in a jurisdiction that specialized in making holding companies difficult to trace. The information, financial exposure data, asset vulnerability reports, the organization's genuine liquidity position as opposed to its reported one, went somewhere she could not yet identify. Someone inside the Jeon organization was selling a detailed picture of its financial anatomy to an outside party. Not stealing. Selling. Regularly. Methodically. For 11 years. On day 9 she arrived at the building at 7:30 instead of 7:45. A small deviation. 15 minutes. She had forgotten her building access for the previous evening, and had arranged with security to retrieve it early. She took the stairwell on the east side of the building, because the elevator was running a maintenance cycle. She pushed open the door to the 14th floor at 7:32 and stopped. There were 2 men in the corridor. One of them was Chairman Lim, whom she recognized from the organizational briefing she had received during onboarding. He was the senior council member. 61 years old. Well-dressed. The kind of face that defaulted to benevolent. The other man she did not recognize. They were speaking in Korean. She caught perhaps 30% of it. Enough. The words she understood with certainty were these. A name she had seen in the pipeline data, a date 3 weeks away, and the word that required no translation in any language. Gone. Chairman Lim said it with the same tone you used to discuss a flight departure. Informational. Timed. Already decided. She did not move. She did not breathe for 4 seconds. Then she stepped back through the stairwell door as quietly as she had opened it, descended to the ground floor, walked out of the building, and kept walking for 6 blocks before stopping. She stood on the pavement with her laptop bag on her shoulder, and the morning traffic moving around her, and understood 3 things simultaneously. The pipeline was Chairman Lim's. The name attached to the word gone was Jeon Hak-yeon, and she had just become a liability to a man who disposed of liabilities with the effect of someone canceling a subscription. She had 3 weeks. She called Ava. What Ava said when she picked up the phone would set in motion the most elaborate disappearance either of them had ever attempted. And the one thing neither of them planned for was Jeon Hak-yeon. Chapter 3: How You Disappear. Ava Monroe had spent 6 years as an emergency room nurse before moving into medical administration. She had seen more varieties of human crisis than most people encountered in 3 lifetimes, and her primary response to all of them was the same: practical, sequential, and immediate. When Serena called and said, "I need to disappear and I need it to look real," Ava was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "How long do you have?" 3 weeks outside. Are you in danger right now at this moment? Not yet. Okay. Go home. Lock the door. Don't go back to that building. I'll call you in 2 hours. She called back in 90 minutes. The plan was not elegant. Elegant plans, Ava had observed, were the ones that collapsed under any pressure at all. This plan was structural, load-bearing, built to survive scrutiny from people who were very good at applying it. The death would need to be public enough to be credible and private enough to be unverifiable. A drowning. A stretch of river outside the city that was known for strong undercurrents. An evening run, Serena ran evenings, this was documented on her fitness tracker, that ended at the water's edge with a shoe, a phone, and a witness who owed Ava a favor significant enough to survive a police interview. The body would never be found. Bodies in that river frequently were not. The dental records and fingerprints on file were from Serena's last employment background check. They would match someone. Ava knew someone in records administration. Serena listened to all of it on the phone without interrupting. "My mother," she said when Ava finished. "I know. She can't know. If she knows I'm alive, she'll tell someone. She doesn't know how to carry a secret that size." The silence between them was the heaviest part of the conversation. "I know," Ava said again, softer this time. Serena spent that evening writing a letter she could not send, addressed to a woman she could not call, explaining things she could not yet explain. She folded it and put it in the inside pocket of the bag she was taking with her. She left everything else. She went back to the Jeon building one final time. Not to her workstation. She went to the lobby, asked for the internal directory, found the extension she needed, and placed a call from the building's internal system. Jeon Hak-yeon's direct line. He picked up on the second ring. She said nothing for 3 seconds. Long enough to be sure he had noted the internal extension. Long enough for him to know it was her. Then she said, "Lim Doo-jae. Seongsu Holding. 11 years. The date is 3 weeks from today." She hung up. She walked out of the building for the last time. 4 days later, Serena Cole drowned in the river outside the city on an evening run. At least that was what the report said. If you are still here and this story has you holding your breath, good. Subscribe right now and drop a comment below. Tell me what you think Jeon Hak-yeon is going to do next. Because I promise you, whatever you are thinking, you are only half right. Chapter 4. The Man Who Did Not Grieve. Jeon Hak-yeon received the news of Serena Cole's death at 11:47 in the evening. He was in a meeting. He read the message, set the phone face down on the table, and finished the meeting. He signed 2 documents, dismissed 3 people, and asked Choi Dae-won to remain. When the room was empty, he sat for a moment without speaking. "The river," he said finally. "Yes." "She ran in the evenings." "Yes." "The shoe and the phone were found at the bank." "Yes." "Nobody." "The current in that section." "I know the current in that section." He picked up his phone and set it on the table in front of him. "She called me 4 days ago from an internal extension in this building." Choi Dae-won said nothing. He had learned that silence was frequently the correct response. "She told me about Lim. About the Seongsu account. About the date." He looked at the phone. "She called me and then she died 4 days later." "It could be. It is not a coincidence." He stood up. "She found something that would get her killed, and instead of running she called me first. And then she ran. Or she was killed for making the call." "No." He was already moving toward the door. "If she had been killed by the call, the body would have been found. A drowning with no body is a message. She is telling me she saw it coming." He stopped at the door. "She is alive." Choi Dae-won looked at his employer carefully. In 11 years he had seen Jeon Hak-yeon furious, calculating, magnanimous, and pitiless. He had never seen him look like this. He searched for the word and arrived at it slowly. Certain. Not hopeful. Certain. Find her, Jeon said. Quietly. Nothing that reaches Lim's people. And when will we find her? Jeon considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Then I am going to need to speak with Judge Woo. Choi Dae-won blinked. The judge? What for? Because I intend to marry her, Jeon said simply. And I would prefer to do it correctly. He walked out. Choi Dae-won stood alone in the empty room for a full 10 seconds before he was able to follow. What Jeon Hak-yeon did next was something that no one in the history of the syndicate had ever seen, and it would force Serena Cole to make the one decision she had never prepared for. Chapter 5: The Announcement. The Jeon organization had a weekly internal briefing. Senior staff, division heads, council members. 41 people in a room every Monday at 9 in the morning. It was administrative. Procedural. People brought coffee and laptops and expected to leave within the hour. 3 weeks after Serena Cole's death, Jeon Hak-yeon stood at the head of the table and made an announcement that caused at least 4 people to set their coffees down very carefully. I will be married within the month, he said. The details are being finalized. You will be informed of the date. Silence. Chairman Lim, seated 4 chairs to the left, smiled at the smile of a man performing the correct social response. Congratulations. May I ask who the fortunate woman is? Serena Cole, Jeon said. The silence this time was a different quality. Denser. Confused. That is, someone began. My fiancé, Jeon said. The announcement stands. We move on. He turned to the agenda. Chairman Lim's smile remained on his face for 3 more seconds before it recalibrated into something more carefully neutral. He picked up his pen and wrote nothing. The news moved through the organization by noon and had reached its outer edges by 3. By evening it had traveled further than that, through the informal channels that connect organizations like the Jeon family to their counterparts, their enemies, and the considerable gray space between. It reached a studio apartment in a city 40 minutes away where a woman who was technically dead was sitting on the floor with her laptop and a bowl of rice she had not eaten. Ava called 2 minutes after the news, hit the channel Serena had been quietly monitoring. Did you see it? I saw it. Serena. He announced he's marrying you. You are dead. He announced he is marrying a dead woman. I heard you for the first time. What does this mean? Serena stared at the screen. The report was brief. No details. Just the name and the announcement delivered with the casual certainty of a man announcing a quarterly result. It means he knows, she said. That you're alive? That I'm alive. And he's doing this publicly so that anyone who wants to hurt me now has to go through the machinery of a marriage announcement to do it. She paused. He's putting a wall around me. In public. Using the one legal and social structure that even his enemies would hesitate to violate. Ava was quiet for a moment. He's protecting you. He's protecting me, Serena confirmed. From his office. While you're dead. By marrying you. Yes. I need you to understand how unusual this is. Ava. I'm just saying. Serena closed the laptop. She sat in the dark of the small apartment and thought about a man who had turned his chair around at her workstation and looked at her like a crossword clue he intended to solve. She thought about 3 weeks of working in the same building as him and never once feeling watched. Feeling instead with a precision she had not admitted to herself until this moment seen. There was a difference. She had spent her whole adult life being watched by men who saw what they wanted to see. Jeon Hak-yeon had looked at her and seen what was actually there. Every time she opened her laptop again, she had a decision to make. But before she could make it, Chairman Lim made one of his own, and it changed the timeline for everyone. Chapter 6: Lim moves first. Chairman Lim had not survived 61 years and 11 years of systematic betrayal by being slow. He had heard Jeon's announcement and understood it immediately for what it was. Not sentiment. Not grief-induced irrationality. A tactical move, which meant Jeon knew something, which meant the dead woman was not dead, which meant the dead woman had talked. He spent 24 hours appearing completely normal. He attended 2 meetings. He had dinner with his wife. He called his secretary and adjusted 3 calendar items. He was, by every external measure, a man at peace. Then he activated a contact he had not used in 4 years. A man whose specific professional skill set existed precisely for situations where official channels were inadequate. Find Serena Cole. Bring her in. He did not say alive or dead. He considered the ambiguity a courtesy. What he did not know was that Choi Dae-won had been monitoring his communications for 18 days. Not because they had proof of anything. Because Jeon Hak-yeon operated on the principle that the absence of evidence was not the same as the presence of innocence. He had learned to watch the people he trusted most with the same attention he gave his enemies. The contact was identified within 3 hours of activation. Choi Dae-won brought the information to Jeon at midnight. Jeon read it once. Set it down. How close are we to finding her? 48 hours. Maybe less. Make it less. He picked up his phone. He called the number she had never answered. It rang. Voicemail. Serena. He paused. Lim knows you are alive. His people are moving. I need you to come in or I need you to run further than 48 hours can reach. Call me back. He ended the call and looked at the window. In the studio apartment 40 minutes away, Serena's phone lit up on the floor beside her. She had been awake. She had been awake every night for 3 weeks. She picked it up and listened to the message once. Then again. She looked at the wall. She had built the disappearance carefully. She had planned for discovery eventually. She was not naive enough to believe it was permanent. What she had not planned for was the specific combination of Jeon Hak-yeon moving toward her at the same speed as Lim Doo-jae's operative. She was, for the first time since she had walked out of the Jeon building, caught between two forces moving in the same direction. She called Ava. I need to make a decision tonight. Come in or run. Yes. What does your gut say? Serena thought about the dental records and the fingerprint match and the coroner's report and the 4 seconds Jeon Hak-yeon had stood at the morgue threshold before walking in. She thought that it was not spoken in a voice with no tremor in it at all. She thought about a man who announced a marriage to a dead woman and meant every word. My gut says he already knows where I am, she said. She was right. There was a knock at the door 20 minutes later. 3 knocks. Measured. Unhurried. She opened it. Choi Dae-won stood in the hallway, alone, in a coat that was slightly damp from the outside air. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been told to expect something extraordinary, and had mentally prepared himself and was still, on some level, surprised. He sent you, she said. He would have come himself, Choi said. But there are people watching him tonight who cannot see him come here. She looked at him for a long moment. He said to tell you, Choi continued, that the choice is yours. He will not force it. But if you come, he can protect you. If you don't, he will protect you anyway. But it will be considerably harder for both of you. Serena Cole, who was technically dead, picked up the one bag she had brought with her and walked out of the studio apartment. What waited for her at the end of that drive was something she had never once in 3 weeks of hiding allowed herself to imagine. Chapter 7, The Living and the Dead. He was standing at the window when she arrived. The room was large and quiet. City lights through the glass. A desk with nothing on it. 2 chairs. He had chosen a location that was not his primary residence. She noted this. A place his people knew but his enemies did not immediately associate with him. He turned when she walked in. They looked at each other across the room and neither of them spoke for a moment that stretched with the specific weight of everything that had accumulated between them. The 14 weeks of her audit, the 2-second eye contact, the phone call, the death, the announcement, and the 18 days in between. She spoke first. You knew from the morgue. The identification was too clean, he said. The right paperwork in the right sequence too quickly. Real deaths are messier. You could have let it stand. No, he said simply. I could not. She put her bag down. Looked at him directly in the way she had disciplined herself not to do in the building 14 weeks ago. The announcement, she said. Yes. You announced a marriage to a dead woman in a room containing the man who wants me dead. I announced a marriage, he said, to make it structurally costly for anyone to touch you. A fiancé is a public statement. Harming a public statement has consequences that harming an anonymous person does not. That is an extremely cold way to describe a marriage proposal. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly. Something that sat beside a smile and had more weight. Would you prefer the other version? She held his gaze. What is the other version? He crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet from her and looked at her with the same attention he had given her at the workstation on day 3. The look that was not watching. The look that I was seeing. I sat in the boardroom for 11 years, he said quietly, surrounded by people who showed me exactly who they were the moment they believed I was not looking. I learned to read rooms the way you read accounts. Pattern recognition. Deviation identification. He paused. In 14 weeks I could not read you. Not once. Not completely. You were the first person in 11 years who surprised me. Serena said nothing. The announcement was tactical, he said. What it was also, and I am not a man who says things I do not mean, was true. The city hummed outside the window. Somewhere in the building, footsteps passed in the hallway and moved on. I need to give you the evidence, she said finally. Everything I photographed. All of it. I know. Lim needs to be stopped before the date. I know that too. And then, she said, we can discuss the other conversation. He looked at her. The marriage conversation, she clarified. He nodded once. Then let us begin. But Lim Doo-jae had not spent 11 years building a pipeline by being careless, and the move he made in the next 12 hours nearly ended everything before it could begin. Chapter 8: The Last Move. Chairman Lim Doo-jae walked into the Monday morning briefing at 9 o'clock looking precisely as he always looked. He set his folder on the table, poured water from the carafe and took his seat. He had not found the girl. His contact had gone silent at 3 in the morning. A silence of the specific kind that meant the contact was no longer available. He had noted this with the stillness of a man recalibrating on the move, and had made 2 decisions before sunrise. The first was to accelerate. The second was to change targets. If Serena Cole had been brought in by Jeon, then Jeon already had the evidence. Which meant the pipeline was already exposed. Which meant the only remaining variable was time. How much of it Lim had before Jeon moved against him formally. He intended to use the time he had. The item he had placed in Jeon's morning coffee was not a poison in the dramatic sense. It was subtler than that. A compound that accumulated. That looked, upon preliminary examination, like a cardiac event. Clean. Deniable. The kind of death that happened to men in their late 30s who carried considerable stress. What Lim did not know was that Choi Dae-won had placed a different cup on the table that morning. He had done it without drama. He had switched the cups at 7:40 in the morning in a movement so ordinary that the 2 other people in the room had not registered it as anything other than a man moving a cup. Jeon Hak-yeon drank his coffee. It was fine. At 9:14, while Chairman Lim was halfway through a sentence about quarterly projections, the doors opened. 4 men entered. They were not Jeon's security team. They were investigators from the Financial Crimes Division of an authority that operated above the level of anyone in the Jeon organization's reach, brought in through a formal referral that had been filed 72 hours earlier, supported by documentation that had been photographed on a personal phone by a forensic accountant who was officially dead. Lim Doo-jae looked at the investigators. Then he looked at Jeon Hak-yeon, who was watching him with the expression of a man who had been patient for exactly as long as the situation required. 11 years, Jeon said quietly. Just that. Chairman Lim was escorted out of the building at 9:17. The room was very quiet afterward. Jeon looked at the table. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and looked at Choi Dae-won. Call Judge Woo, he said. Tell him his schedule tomorrow needs to include an unusual proceeding. What shall I tell him it is? A marriage license, Jeon said. Issued to a woman who will need to be legally alive again first. What happened in Judge Woo's chambers the following morning was something that none of the 3 people present ever fully described to anyone, but all 3 of them carried it for the rest of their lives. Chapter 9. The Alive and the Chosen. Judge Woo Sung-min had presided over 312 legal proceedings in his career. He had nullified contracts, dissolved estates, mediated corporate disputes of extraordinary complexity, and once oversaw a property case that had involved 17 parties and a parrot. He had believed, going into his chambers on Tuesday morning, that he had seen the full range of what the law was capable of producing. He had not accounted for this. The woman sitting across from him was officially dead. He had the death certificate in front of him. He also had, in a separate folder, a declaration of administrative error regarding that death certificate, supported by identification, biometric confirmation, and a sworn affidavit from a medical professional that the records had been falsified under duress. He also had a marriage license application. He looked from the document to the woman to the man sitting beside her and then back to the document. "You understand," he said carefully, "that we must first restore your legal status before we can proceed to the license." "Yes," Serena said. "And you are doing both today." "Yes." He looked at Jeon Hak-yeon. "And you?" "I am marrying her today," Jeon said. "The sequence is yours to manage." Judge Woo looked at them both for a long moment. He was 60 years old and had learned, over the course of those years, to identify the difference between people who were doing something for practical reasons and people who were doing something because it was the only thing left in the world that made complete sense to them. He stamped the death certificate nullification. He signed the restoration of legal status. He opened the marriage license. "Do you have a witness?" The door opened and Ava Monroe walked in, still slightly out of breath from the stairs, holding her handbag against her chest and looking at Serena with an expression that contained approximately 47 different emotions in rapid succession. "Present," she said. Serena looked at her and then had to look away. The proceeding was brief. Judge Woo asked the questions that the law required. The answers were given clearly. When he reached the point in the proceeding where he asked Jeon Hak-yeon whether he took Serena Cole as his wife, the man looked at the woman beside him with the same attention he had given her on day 3 of a 14-week audit, the look that was not watching but seeing, and said yes in a voice that required no qualification. When he asked Serena, she was quiet for 1 second. She was thinking about a man who had stood at the threshold of a morgue for 4 seconds, who had said that is not her with the certainty of a man speaking about something he knew as well as his own name, who had announced a marriage to the dead because the alternative, proceeding as though she did not exist, was simply not something his mind would accept. She said yes. Judge Woo signed the license. Ava cried. She had planned not to. The plan failed completely. Outside the building, in the ordinary Tuesday morning of a city that knew nothing of what had just occurred inside it, Serena Cole stood on the pavement and breathed the air of a woman who was officially, legally documented alive. Jeon Hak-yeon stood beside her. "Your mother," he said. She turned to look at him. "She should know you are alive," he said. "Whatever it costs to manage that, we will manage it. But she has carried this long enough." Serena looked at the street. "She's going to have a lot of questions," she said. "She can direct them to me," he said. Serena looked at him then. The full attention. No 2-second limit. No discipline. Just looking at a man who had refused at every point to accept a version of her that was less than what was actually there. "You are a very strange man," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know." She called her mother from the pavement. The call lasted 11 minutes. Mrs. Adaora Cole cried for the first 4, was silent for the next 3, and spent the final 4 asking questions in the specific rapid sequence of a woman with a great deal of stored-up maternal authority and no intention of deploying it gently. Serena answered every question. When she hung up, Jeon was still standing beside her. He had not moved. He had given her 11 minutes without comment or impatience. "She wants to meet you," Serena said. "Good," he said. "She's already praying for you." "Also good." Serena looked at the street again. Then she looked at the man she had married in a judge's chambers on a Tuesday morning after 3 weeks of being officially dead. "What do we do now?" she asked. He considered the question with the seriousness he gave everything. "Now," he said, "we go home." Finally. There is a particular kind of love that does not announce itself in the conventional moments. It does not arrive at weddings or sunsets or in the middle of speeches written for the occasion. It arrives instead in the moments you do not design for it. It arrives in 4 seconds of hesitation at a morgue door. In a chair pulled from an adjacent desk and turned around. In an announcement made to a room full of potential enemies that says, without ambiguity, "This person exists and I will not pretend otherwise." Serena Cole spent 3 weeks being dead, because it was the only way she knew to protect someone she barely knew she was beginning to love. Jeon Hak-yeon spent those same 3 weeks refusing to process a world in which she did not exist. Chairman Lim faced his proceedings and discovered that 11 years of careful concealment looks considerably less careful when examined by people who were sent the exact location of every seam. Ava Monroe was the maid of honor at a wedding she had helped plan in the form of a disappearance, which she considered one of the more unusual achievements of her career. Mrs. Serena Cole met Jeon Hak-yeon 6 days after the Tuesday in the judge's chambers. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You kept her alive when she was trying to be dead." He said yes. She nodded once and told him to sit down and eat. He sat down. He ate. Some things in the end are that simple. Death could not hold the space between them. It had tried. It had been very convincing paperwork. But some things are more stubborn than paperwork. And some people are more permanent than death. If this story moved something in you, if you stayed through every chapter and felt every moment of it, then you already know what kind of storytelling we do here. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you have not yet, because this channel is where stories like this live, stories that do not end the way you expect and do not let go the way you plan. Drop a comment and tell me the one moment in this story that hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.